Hello, and welcome to the Wine Enthusiast podcast, your serving of drinks culture and the people who drive it. I'm Samantha Sette, digital web producer here at Wine Enthusiast. As we enter a new year, many of us seek to lead healthier, happier lifestyles. What does it really mean to be healthy? It can feel like the answer to this question is constantly changing, which is why I was so excited and humbled to speak with Dan Buettner, National Geographic Fellow and founder of Blue Zones. Dan spent years discovering communities where people live vibrant lives past the age of 100, and those factors that led them there. Now, we can't help but wonder, where does a glass of wine fit in the picture? Listen to find out how Dan's findings from the Blue Zones can shape a more informed approach to drinking in the new year. The Calling is a dream collection of California wines offering a distinct range of varietals, styles, and best-in-class appellations. Winemaker James McPhail gives each wine a clear, singular voice, working with renowned family growers to craft Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and Cabernet Sauvignon, while collecting over 70 90-plus scores in the process. Join one of the Calling's fully customizable wine clubs for first access to new releases, special library vintages, and more. With 4 membership options, there's a club for every wine lover. Receive 3 shipments per year, or try the monthly subscription, delivering 3 bottles a month straight to your door. For information and access, visit us at www.thecallingwine.com/enthusiast. Dan, thank you so much for joining me today. And to get started, for anyone who might not be familiar, can you tell us a little bit more about the Blue Zones project and really about yourself? Welcome.
Well, I'm a lifelong explorer, and I approach longevity not as a health guru or Instagram influencer, but rather as somebody who likes to unravel mysteries. For over 30 years, I've been leading scientific expeditions, most of them actually around ancient mysteries like the collapse of the Maya civilization and did Marco Polo really go to China? And about 24 years ago, I came across a finding from the World Health Organization that a little cluster of islands in Southeast Asia were producing the longest disability-free life expectancy in the world. And I said, aha, now there's a good mystery. And I put together, at the time, I had a full-time team of explorers and writers. I had a Harvard archaeologist on staff, an MIT biologist, and I took that whole team and we went to try to begin to unravel the mystery. But we found that trying to unravel the mystery of longevity is really kind of a Gordian knot. It's not easily untied. After that first expedition, I got hooked. In about 2004, I got a grant, money from the National Institutes on Aging and a plum assignment from National Geographic, and we really attacked the question: how can we live longer?
And would you say that's exactly how you started the Blue Zones project?
Yes. I mean, we added a few assumptions. The first assumption. It's widely accepted that only about 20% is dictated by our genes, 80% is something else. And I reasoned that if we could find places that were demographically confirmed where people are living the longest lives, that we could look for the common denominators or extrapolate from what they're doing over time and distill a pretty good formula for longevity for the rest of us.
Yeah, and for those who aren't familiar, what is this? Is this the framework of Blue Zones? How would you boil it down to what is the Blue Zones project?
Well, instead of looking for answers in petri dishes or genetic code, we find populations where people are living manifestly longer. They either have the lowest rate of middle-age mortality or the highest centenarian rate. Usually those two go hand in hand. And then we, with another team of scientists, go through to find the correlates, or what do all these populations have in common: how they eat, how they socialize, how they connect, how they shed stress, etc. What supplements they may or may not take, what teas they may or may not drink, to find a signal that's strong enough to say, this is happening widely enough and it's happening constantly enough And it's happening in these populations who suffer a fraction of the rate of heart disease and diabetes and cancer and dementia, that we ought to be paying attention to it. And most of my books and stories in National Geographic have uncovered that mystery piece by piece.
Yeah, and where are these regions? Where are these blue zone and longevity communities where people are living long, healthy lives?
The longest lived men live in the highlands of Sardinia, the Nuoro and Oleaster provinces. The longest lived women live in Okinawa, Japan. On the island of Ikaria, we have a population living about 8 years longer than Americans do, with about one fifth the rate of dementia that we suffer. In Nicoya Peninsula of Costa Rica, another population that has half the rate of middle age mortality. And what that means is they're over twice as likely to reach a healthy 95 than Americans are. They spend 1/15 the amount we do on healthcare, and they produce a much healthier population. So we really ought to be paying attention to them, given the fact we're blowing through almost $4.5 trillion a year on mostly avoidable diseases in this country. And then in the United States, among the Seventh day Adventists, we have a population living 4 to 7 years longer than their American counterparts do. So they're also interesting because they live in the same country that most of the rest of us do.
Yeah, and what from these communities, like what do you think is contributing, I guess through your research that you found, contributing to these longer, healthy lives?
Well, a lot of people like to start with food. And if you want to know what a 100-year-old ate to live to be 100, you have to know what she was eating when she was a little kid and a young adult and working age and newly retired and lately. Most journalists and my critics, they'll go to a blue zone today and they'll say, "Well, they're not eating that healthy. Yeah, they can't be." Buettner's lying. But what we did is I worked with Harvard to do what's called a meta-analysis. We found 155 dietary surveys done in all 5 blue zones over the last 100 years, and we averaged them. And when you look what people ate over time, it's about 90 to 95% whole food, plant-based. They're eating meat only about 5 times per month, but most of their day-to-day, week-to-week food is whole grains, sourdough bread in Sardinia, corn tortillas in the Nicoya Peninsula, rice in most of these cultures, greens and garden vegetables. That's not surprising. Tubers, interestingly, about 70% of all the calories that Okinawan consumed until about 1975 came from sweet potatoes, a purple sweet potato known as emo. Nuts are often the snack food, and then beans are the cornerstone of every longevity diet in the world. And if you're eating a cup of beans a day, it's probably worth about 4 extra years of life expectancy over getting your protein from less healthy sources. And when it comes to what they drink, good news for most of us listening: 6 glasses of water, teas of all kinds, coffee, believe it or not, number one source of antioxidants in the American diet, and wine. And at least 3 of the blue zones, we see nearly daily consumption of, homemade or organic red wine. And then in Okinawa, we also see sake. So wine has its place in the longevity path that we've seen in blue zones.
Yeah. And what I love most about hearing you speak about this is that it kind of goes against all these popular ideas we have about health, right? It's this food's good and this food's bad. And it's a more holistic approach that actually includes these things that might not be bad, like wine. And for our listeners who are clearly wine enthusiasts, I mean, you're here for a reason. How would you describe the wine drinking in some of these places? I know Sardinia was one of them where they drink a moderate amount of wine. What does this look like in their lifestyles, how they incorporate wine?
Well, I mean, men especially, you see wine consumption throughout the day, but not a lot. Their wine glasses aren't the big goblets we tend to drink. They're tiny little stemless, cheap little glasses that hold maybe 2 or 3 ounces of wine. But you might see a little glass mid morning, another little glass at lunch, another little glass with friends, another glass with dinner. And I've recently seen a survey of people over 90, and 85% of them drink wine every day. But the context is also important. You don't see people just slamming a glass of wine after work because they want to de-stress. It's almost always with friends. It's almost always with a meal. And by the way, if you're drinking a glass of red wine with a plant-based meal, you about quadruple the absorption of certain flavonoids or antioxidants. So, I mean, there's that. I'm very familiar with the latest studies that show that no level of alcohol is safe. But there's a few caveats to those studies. One, they also include the risk of death from falling down or car accidents, which aren't necessarily health threats as much as they are bigger picture threats. And they don't take into consideration context. People who drink red wine probably tend to be more social, at least in the blue zones. They tend to eat it with a meal. Of course, their wines are probably healthier than the average, wine at Costco. They're homemade. They tend to have slightly lower alcohol. They tend to be young wines. They're made this season and consumed this season. And in some cases, the pre-phylloxera wines as well, which is really interesting. We have at least one case of that in Icaria, where the vines are about 140 years old, which I found very interesting.
Wow, is that Greece, Icaria?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
What I love here is this emphasis on context, and it's something that I have a science background a bit in the health community, and something I really think that more people should pay attention to is it's not just what you're consuming, right? It's who's around you, this element of community, which is that a big part of the Blue Zones? Has your research kind of dove deeper into that element of context?
Well, you look at these blue zones and the way their communities are set up traditionally. America, about 25% of us are lonely, and loneliness in America is associated with about 8 fewer years of life expectancy. America, we're not necessarily born with a social circle. We have to build it ourselves. In blue zones, the communities are much tighter. They pull together in times of hardship. They pull together and very regularly with community-wide parties that aren't just a bunch of young people raving, but they're people from 8 to 98. Especially in Icaria, these panayires, which there's about 80 or 90 of them, which go all night long, and people start drinking at 11 and they finish at 9 the next morning. Not getting silly drunk, but it sort of fuels the evening sip by sip. And they live in places where every time they step out their front door, they're bumping into people. It's not like you go from your attached garage in your suburb to your job with an underground garage and then up to work. These people are constantly bumping into their neighbors, their people they buy bread from, people they deliver their mail. And it's a very social community, and they drink socially.
It's not just a drink after a hard day's work. It's more than that. It seems like it's fueled by purpose.
Yeah. And it's not the quantity. Again, it's like you don't really see people drinking huge glasses of wine. They're tiny little glasses, but savored. And the wine too, by the way, has less sugar. You're not going to have the pesticides in it. It's organic. It probably has more active polyphenols, and the wine may very well be healthier in a blue zone than it is, off the grocery shelf here in the United States.
And for our listeners who might not be familiar, what makes something like polyphenols and antioxidants and the fact that it's organic kind of better, if you will, or more nutrient dense?
Well, we've all heard of resveratrol, which is one of those polyphenols, but also the procyanid, which is another polyphenol you see especially in Sardinia and Cananao. That's been actually shown to reduce inflammation of the endothelial, which is the lining of the heart. So when you're dosing yourself regularly, small doses, there is an argument that you have less arterial inflammation and therefore less chance of developing a blockage and a heart attack. I can't make a causal claim there, but I can, you know, offer a string of associations, which may be or may not be persuasive depending on who you are. But of course, they don't use pesticides. There's no sulfides, unless they put it in a bottle and they ship it to the United States. But the wines they're drinking there are sulfide free on a day-to-day basis. So yeah, and then once again, they're ancient grapes. The grapes in Sardinia, the Cannonau, they're interesting because they're bombarded with about 330 days of high altitude sunshine. And the grape's response to that is to generate more pigment in the skin, which the pigment, it turns out, is where a lot of these polyphenols or antioxidants are. It's literally the redness of the grape. And the way the wine is made in Sardinia, the juice ferments with crushed seeds and the skins. So all those wonderful rich polyphenols can leach into the wine, which is later finished. So, as a result, the very interesting researcher named Roger Corder, Corder, that studied these wines from around the world for their polyphenol levels. And a couple of the Sardinian varietals have among the highest concentrations of polyphenols in the world, which may or may not explain their longevity.
Yeah, and for anyone who is maybe in the United States or somewhere that is not one of these blue zones, is there a way to have this wine, taste it, go and experience it?
You can try a Cannonau from Sardinia. I think if you Google Blue Zones wine, you might find it. But yeah, the Cannonau from Sardinia is a good place to start, especially if you can find it from the Ogliastra province. It's not quite the same when it's grown at sea level elsewhere in Sardinia.
Can you tell me a little bit more about why that is, if you have any idea why?
Well, okay, first of all, it's grown in a place where people are living longer and consumed by those people. People who live on the coast in Sardinia don't live any longer than their Italian counterparts in the mainland. It's only the highland Sardinians. And number two, the grapes in the highlands are exposed to, they're 3,000 feet higher, and they're exposed to more radiation, which may occasion more pigment and therefore more antioxidants in the skin. And the way, I know the way the people in the highlands make their grapes, make their wine, they crush it all together, leave this, the skins in the seeds to marinate for 15 days before they continue the winemaking process.
Where can you find the best gifts at great low prices that everyone will love? At Total Wine and More, of course. With so many great bottles to choose from, find something for everyone on your list, whether it's a Cabernet for your sis, sparkling wine for a coworker, or a single barrel bourbon for dad. And if you need any help, just ask one of our friendly guides for advice. With the lowest prices for over 30 years, you'll always find what you love and love what you find, only at Total Wine and More. Spirits not sold in Virginia and North Carolina. Drink responsibly. Be 21. I did want to zoom out too, because I meant to circle back on this, that wine seems to be an element of your Power 9, which I guess for those who might not be familiar, can you share with us what is the Power 9 with Blue Zones?
They're the 9 common denominators of no matter where you go in the world and see long-lived people. So they're eating mostly a whole food, plant-based diet. They have a vocabulary for purpose. They have sacred daily rituals to shed stress. They tend to hang out with family. They prioritize family over work or over their sports team. They tend to be religious, by the way. They move naturally. They don't really exercise as much as live in environments that nudge them into moving every 20 minutes or so. And then they carefully, not necessarily consciously, but they're surrounded by people, their immediate social circle, that encourage the right behaviors and help marginalize the wrong or the unhealthy behaviors. So that all adds up. They're the common denominators. And drinking wine is one of the common denominators, or some form of alcoholic beverage. except for the Adventists. Only about half the Adventists drink. They're officially not supposed to drink, but all other blue zones, they enjoy a little wine as a celebratory food or celebratory beverage, or, sort of the end of the day or with friends with a good meal.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but these 9 habits or, things that people can do, if you will, they don't exist in isolation. Is that correct?
That's right. The key finding from the blue zones is that if you want to live longer, don't try to change your behavior, or don't necessarily even try to make a new habit. Not that habits don't work over the short run, and they work for maybe single digit percent people for the long run. But when it comes to longevity, there's no short term fix. There's no pill, there's no supplement, there's no diet, there's no exercise program that you can do for the next few months or maybe a year or two that has any impact on how long you're going to live. And if you look at all diets and exercise programs and supplement patterns, they tend to last maybe a year. You tend to lose about 90% of people after 7 months, and all of those. So in blue zones, they don't get involved with any of that. They're not doing CrossFit or online buying their supplement packets or superfoods or on that new fad diet come New Year's. They just live their lives. So the insight here is that if you want to live longer, change your environment. And people in blue zones, their environment is such that their unconscious decisions are marginally better. Their conscious micro decisions are unconsciously better all day long. Every time they go to work or a friend's house, it occasions a walk. They have gardens out back. So every day they're out weeding or watering or harvesting. Their lives aren't full of mechanized conveniences, so they still do yard work and housework by hand. They're social by default. They're eating this very simple peasant food by default because it's the cheapest and most accessible. And quite frankly, they know how to make it the most delicious. If you look at my book, The Blue Zone's Kitchen, which is one of the top 50 cookbooks of all time, and I'm not even a cook, but I gathered the recipes. And you see very clearly the foods that people eat on a day-to-day pattern, driving longevity, are simple peasant foods. Not because, if they had meat, they wouldn't eat it. It's just because they couldn't afford meat. So they learned how to make these simple foods taste good, which is a really important message to not only rich people in America, but poor people in America too. You don't have to shop at fancy grocery stores and eat fresh produce. If you have beans and rice or beans and tortilla or pasta and fagioli or minestrone soup, these all cost less than $1 a serving, and they're a lot healthier than, the superfood crap you buy on the internet.
It's so true. I can attest that the cookbook is great. I've made a couple things from it. And it's so refreshing to hear this. I think, especially as we enter a new year, everyone's, like you said, going for that quick fix. And it's interesting because that quick fix is usually for a shorter term goal than longevity. And it makes me wonder, why aren't we striving for longevity? Why aren't we striving for a robust life full of vitality to the very end? And I guess as a message for our listeners, for as we head into the fad diets and dry January, it seems like those things aren't the answer.
No, they're not. They always fail, or they fail for 97% of people. It's a waste of time. Might make you feel better, after your hangover on January 1st, but it's not going to really do you any good. And the data is very clear on that. By January 19th, over half of people who started New Year's resolutions have already failed, and you lose the rest sometime the mid-February. So it's a waste of time. You're much better off on New Year's Eve to say to yourself, I'm going to make some new friends this year. I'm going to surround myself with friends whose idea of recreation is pickleball or tennis or bicycling or gardening or walking. Friends who care about me on a bad day, and friends who's it's not a bad idea to have a vegan or vegetarian friend, because they're going to show you how to make and find delicious plant-based food. And it's not bad to have, by the way, friends who are going to meet you in happy hour and have a glass or two of wine. That's something we very clearly see in blue zones, but it's not about the wine. It's about what comes with the wine, the fellowship, the stress reduction, that comes with a good happy hour with somebody who cares about you. That's what you want to build at New Year's. Save your money on the fad diet and the bullshit supplements.
Yeah, and I think we can all relate at some point in our lives or another that we kind of do latch on to those things that we're told are going to make our lives better, and they never do. Because it's the things like you said, community, conviviality, feeling like you belong and you have a purpose, which is so powerful but so overlooked.
The reason is it's hard to make money if you're peddling purpose or trying to convince people to socialize in a healthy way. The way you make money is you sell hope with supplements, you sell hope with weight loss programs, you sell hope with intense exercise programs, and you suggest it's a quick fix. And people buy that all the time. They perennial buy it and make a lot of money at it. And the reason they make a lot of money at it is because it fails. And then you get the same people signing up next year for something slightly different. I mean, I guess it's kind of a form of recreation, but it doesn't really help us. Life expectancy in America has dropped by 2.5 years in the last 3 years. It's mostly because of chronic disease, by the way. Pandemic has fueled that, but 75% of Americans are obese or overweight. That's about triple what it was, when I was a young man. And it just keeps getting worse. And we keep trying the same things over and over. That's Einstein's definition of insanity. We keep trying diets, exercise, longevity hacks, supplements, and it never works. We just keep getting fatter and sicker, and we never really wake up. Rather than doing that over and over, why not look at populations that have actually achieved the outcomes we want and mimic them, mimic their environments, mimic their patterns? We could save our country a lot of grief and a lot of pain and a lot of money.
Yeah, it's so, again, inspirational, honestly, to hear this because as much as I have hope, I'm also fearful of the future. And being part of a younger generation, I'm curious to see, will this change for the better? There's going to be change, that's inevitable, but how will it change? And hopefully, through more communities that model after the Blue Zones, we can kind of cultivate more longevity and healthier living that isn't buying into what marketing tells us is healthy living.
It maybe or maybe not. In the meantime, we'll all raise our glass to a happy hour.
Very true. And I guess with that, what advice, like in a nutshell, would you give to someone who maybe is listening to this and wants to make a change in the new year and wants to better their lives? What is one simple thing that they could do?
Well, I know everybody wants a soundbite right now, but I've spent the last 20 years writing on this. I've written 4 New York Times bestsellers. Uh, Google Blue Zones books and pick one that's right for you. That's the best thing. And I know it's kind of a blatant plug, but it's just a little bit more complex than a soundbite. But one counterintuitive thing you can do is internal inventory of what you're good at, what you like to do, what your values are. Actually, I would actually say write those down in 3 columns. Look for the commonalities, and then in a fourth column, write down an outlet. Only about 30% of Americans find their purpose at work. That means the majority of us need to find our purpose elsewhere. And people say, what's Buettner talking about purpose for? Because people who can articulate their sense of purpose live about 8 years longer than people who are rudderless in life. And most of us are rudderless, at least when it comes to our work life. So finding a volunteer outlet, finding a group of friends with a shared vision or a shared passion and getting involved with there's far better evidence that will lengthen your life than any resveratrol pill or longevity hack, the metformin, testosterone, stem cells, all that other experimental crap. Find a sense of purpose and put it to work in your life. And you'll not only live longer, you'll enjoy the journey.
So true. And one of my favorite questions to ask people as we begin to wrap up here is, did you ever expect to end up where you are today?
No, no, but I will tell you, when I graduated from college and other people were doing useful and productive things, I set 3 records biking around the world, biking Alaska to Argentina, and biking the length and width of Africa. And nobody thought I'd amount to much. But it turns out that that following my passions like that, developing resilience and some empathy and an ability to talk to people in all walks of life were the very strengths I needed to build Blue Zones. And Blue Zones projects are now in 80 cities in America. I just finished a Netflix documentary series, which was one of its most successful in history, international series. We were top 10 in 83 different countries, called Living to 100, by the way, if you haven't seen it. Just came out in August. And it's been, phenomenally successful. But I look at myself as the blind squirrel who found a nut. I got lucky.
I love that because I think when we're so fixated on ending up somewhere, we never end up that way. It never looks like how we think it's going to. Life is unpredictable. That's kind of the beauty of it. And I guess in enjoying all that celebration, we have to ask, what's in your glass?
Well, I'm a Brunello fanatic.
Ooh.
I love a Brunello, and I have a number of them. I bring Conant out at dinner parties because I think at the end of the day, a good wine has a good narrative. And also, there's a Icarian producer named Afines, Afines, that produce a pre-phylloxera white wine, which is amazing. And I always get some of that. I love bringing it because I tell people you're tasting a wine that Homer probably tasted, or very similar to what Homer tasted. It's crushed underfoot in granite crypts, and then it's fermented in clay amphora under the ground. It's a very different wine experience. It's called Afines, again, a vineyard in Icaria, good friends of mine. So those are what's in my glass.
That sounds delicious. I never even heard of that. Definitely have to check it out. And I know you referred to this earlier, but where can our listeners find you besides watching the documentary? Where else? If you want to plug anything.
Okay, well, at Dan Buettner on Instagram, I do new longevity tips almost every day. And my name is DanBuettner at Dan Buettner. And then danbuettner.com. If you're interested in my articles, they're free on there. I have recipes to live to 100, some tools if you're interested in that. And my latest New York Times bestseller is called Blue Zones: Secrets to Living Longer, and it reads like an illustrated manual on how to get an extra 10 years of life. So that might be a useful resource.
That's really exciting. And I guess expression of gratitude. Once again, thank you so much for taking your time to chat with us today.
Well, Sam, I hope to see you when you're 100. And I love your magazine, and I'm a wine enthusiast myself. And it's so nice to meet the editor. And it's behind all that sort of bravado that I think the magazine projects. There's a very sweet, intelligent person. So very nice to meet you.
You as well. When it comes to living healthier lives, context clearly matters. Are you planning to make healthier changes in the coming year? And if so, how? We'd love to know. You can email us your comments and questions at podcast@wineenthusiast.net. Remember, you can subscribe to this podcast on Apple, Google, Spotify, and anywhere else you listen to your favorite shows. You can also go to wineenthusiast.com/podcast for more episodes and transcripts. I'm Samantha Sette. Thanks for listening. In addition to producing world-class content, did you know that Wine Enthusiast is also the premier shopping destination for wine lifestyle products? Just visit our shop at wineenthusiast.com, where you'll discover an amazing assortment of unique quality items guaranteed to enhance your wine experience. From glassware and accessories to thousands of unique wine gifts, it's like a toy store for wine lovers. And don't forget about protecting your wine. We are the nation's leading retailer of wine storage products. Whether you have 6 or 600 bottles, desire a wine cabinet, or a custom-designed wine room, our free wine storage consultations will help you find the perfect fit for your collection. Visit wineenthusiast.com today. We bring wine to life. brought to you by the Wine Enthusiast Shop.